Hello and welcome to this transfer special of the Albion Obsessed podcast. Today we are going to chat about the ins and the outs of the summer transfer window. We're going to ask a few questions and we're going to think to ourselves, is the Brighton squad in a better place at the end of the transfer window than it was at the beginning? But before we dive into that, let's see who we've got on the show today. We welcome back Joe Sayers. Joe Sayers, how are you, my friend?
Hello, Thomas Budgeon. I am very good, Thomas Budgeon. Thank you very much for asking, Thomas Budgeon.
That's quite all right, Joseph Sayers. It's a pleasure, Joseph Sayers, to be speaking to you, Joseph Sayers. And I'm not going to do that all the whole show. And we also welcome back Dan. Dan, my friend, how are you keeping?
Yeah, not too bad. I was a bit upset that the transfer window is now finished because basically the transfer show is basically on when I get home. So like, no, this morning I came home and it's not on. That was quite sad. But there we go. I just got to wait until January to come back around. But otherwise, I'm all good.
Glad to hear it, mate. And may I just say, what a lovely shirt you are wearing today. Dan, you said there about, you're sad that the transfer window is closed. I, for one, am very happy that it is closed because we can finally just move on and we can put to bed the ever-increasing hope that we have for signing a striker. But more about that in a little while. So, what we're going to do in this episode, guys, is we're going to talk about the highlights. There's a lot of outs, especially that we're probably not going to discuss in this particular episode because they don't maintain to first-team players. We're going to very much keep this in the realms of first-teamers. There may be one or two that aren't first-team players, but the fee or the context around them leaving is just worth having a little chat about. So we'll start with the outs, I think. And then we'll move on to the ins. The first one we're going to talk about is one that we've already had a little chat about during the summer, and that was Yves Bissouma, who moved to Spurs between the region of 25 million and 35 million, depending on who your sources are. Joe, with a year left on his contract, it was the right move, was it not?
It was the right move for the club, for us, definitely. Seeing how it's panning out at Tottenham for Bissouma is a little bit of a shame. Something came out, a quote from Conte today saying he was behind Bentancur and Højbjerg. And I'd imagine there was something in the Spurs move that Yves Bissouma was excited about, that he might feature heavily because he's proved that he can be one of the best midfielders in the Premier League at Brighton. So maybe there's a little bit of disappointment on his end there. Hindsight, as we've said many times, is a wonderful thing. Maybe he's thinking he would have been better off staying at Brighton and signing maybe even just another 2-year deal and to continue to prove himself, and then to get his really big move once he's shone yet again in the Premier League. So I'm a bit disappointed for him that he's gone to Spurs and not had the say that he might want. Obviously, there's a lot of time time left. There's only been 5 games into the season. We'll see what happens. But from our point of view, with a year left and no signs of him signing a new contract, I think we could be happy with that.
Most certainly. I mean, a lot of the question marks, Dan, were about who would replace Bissouma. But from what we've seen so far, Moises Caicedo and Alexis McAllister seem to be well up for the job.
Yeah, they've done very well to cover his loss. But as I say, with the transfer itself, obviously, it's a shame that he's not really featured as much, which I think it probably hindered him that he was injured to start off the season. So because if he was probably available, he might have probably had that first game straight away. But as I say, got enough time for him to get himself into the squad, because I think we know he's better than what they've got. He definitely can do it at this level, and he deserves to play in the Champions League. But on our side, we've done well. McAllister has just shone in that position. So we already had a ready-made replacement already for him. But it would have been nicer to keep him. But as we all said, 1 year left his contract, no sign of him to sign a new deal. Get the money now, and then we can look towards the future.
Yeah, it's disappointing to see him potentially warming the bench at Spurs. We know that he is perhaps one of the best holding midfielders in the league. He's definitely got to be in there in the conversation. But we wish him well, as we have already said during the summer. Let's move on then to another out that I think we were all reasonably glad about, and that was Aaron Connolly moving out on loan to Venezia. Joe, we've made a lot on this podcast before about it's Aaron getting some time away and helping to build himself as a person, a different culture in Italy, a different lifestyle. Do you think this will benefit him as a player as well as a person?
I really hope so, because we've seen on some occasions that there's definitely a player in there. There's 100% potential for him to go on and be a real pain in the backside for opposition defenders. He's quick, he's small, he's nimble, and that's sometimes what you really like from a forward player. Just somebody that can just cause some havoc and run around and buzz around them. I really hope for his sake, because we've a lot of Brighton fans have had their say on Aaron Connolly. A lot of it very negative, based on the attitude that we have seen. He's had a couple of loans, obviously, out of the club in England, and they haven't worked out. So let's just hope that move, that change of culture, can just shape him and round him and make him realise that there's more to being a footballer than the glitz and glam of it all. And I hope he comes back and does well for us, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, his leaving has definitely left a hole in the squad, even if it is just a number, Dan. We will, of course, talk about it when we talk about the ins, but obviously no striker was incoming during this transfer window. So, losing Aaron Connolly, losing a striker who has scored at this level, who has performed at this level, albeit in drips and drabs, it definitely has an impact, on our depth up front, does it not?
It does, but as we said about his attitude and what we've heard he's been doing outside the pitch, it's very much something that it's very worrying, because I know he's young. He wants to enjoy his life outside of football. That's we can't begrudge him for that. But when you're hearing in the paper that you're having arguments with people over your partner and in clubs and being disorderly and everywhere, and it's something you don't really want to see. You don't want to see this, and as we say, we hope that this move is the making of him, because you can't just be the player you are, that you were and play in Premier League 2 and be called up to the squad and have such a brilliant debut and then basically then pretty much do nothing after that. And hopefully he did say in an interview that he hopes that this will help him develop into a better person, to a better player, which I hope for his sake is the case. And hopefully we can get back next season, different person, ready to rock again, try again, see if it happens again, and then if not, unfortunately we have to maybe look elsewhere for another player to replace him.
Yeah, we wish him all the best. He's still a Brighton player, and let's just hope that he can get his head right as well as his football over in Italy. Now, at the top of the show, Joe, I said that we were just going to keep this to first team players, really. Now, there is a young lad that didn't actually feature for our first team at all, who's also ended up in Italy. And the reason I'm going to talk about this man, Leo Østegård, is because he has had a move to Napoli that is going to be move up to £10 million. Now, Joe, that's a decent bit of business for a man that has never featured for our first team, isn't it?
Yeah, mad. And with our recruitment, what we do as well as bring in players that are going to really heavily feature for our first team is we get people that maybe won't, but will get sold on for a decent amount of profit and to help our club financially, because we know that we need that. We can't compete with some of the big spenders, and this has to happen for us to continue to do so well and what we have done so well. Obviously, the likes of Percy Tau comes to mind with that money situation, bringing someone in and then selling them on. I know he featured a little bit more than Østegård did, but it's the same model. And I wish Østegård all the best, because I really wanted to see him in our first team, because he's that old-fashioned centre-back that no nonsense is just going to like head anything, a little bit like a Shane Duffy, but obviously younger and a little bit more potential. No disrespect to Shane Duffy at all. We all know what he's done for the club, and obviously he's moved on to Fulham now on loan, which I hope he does really well, because he is a decent Premier League centre-back. But I just think for Ørstegård, there's just so many centre-backs for him to compete with. And the club clearly made a decision on who they liked better, who Graham Potter could work with better, and he didn't fall into that category. And you mentioned the fee; it's fantastic for us.
Very much so. And you mentioned there Shane Duffy. So, Dan, let's talk about Shane Duffy. Shane Duffy departed Brighton on loan to Fulham. Graham Potter called Shane Duffy a Brighton and Hove Albion legend. Now, in our Agree to Disagree video, myself and Joe, we talked about players being classed as legends. There's no doubt whatsoever that Shane Duffy was such a key part of our promotion to the Premier League and a key figure in Chris Hughton's defence during our first few seasons in the Premier League. Do you think Shane Duffy is a legend?
For me, I'd say somewhere near it, because it's a Championship level when we're in our promotion season. I think we were considered having the best defence in that league in that year. Then in the Premier League, I think we're somewhere near again. That partnership with Shane Duffy and Doug will basically live with all of us, because at the moment, obviously, we want Webster to sort of be that first player, and obviously with Veltman as well, to be basically the best centre backs we had. But the pairing of just Shane Duffy and Lewis Dunk, I don't think we'd have that again. It's just amazing how solid they were, and how good they were together. Because you think when Shane Duffy, before he came, we weren't sure, because that last game he had was it 2 own goals and he had a red card, didn't he? Or something he had at Blackburn, and we're like going, "Oh, is this the player we want?" And look at him now. You know, it's unfortunate he has to go on loan to Fulham, but at least now he's playing. I wish him all the best. I really like Shane Duffy. He's a solid person, solid player as well. Such a great guy to obviously have around, but he needs at his ripe age, as we say, he needs the minutes.
Ain't nobody like Shane Duffy. Yeah, he was. I really like Shane. He's always spoken very well about the club and about Graham Potter. He had a really disappointing loan season up in Scotland. Came back, and there were lots of question marks about whether he'd make his way back into the squad, and he did, and he scored within the opening fixtures last season. He looked fantastic. Obviously, went off the ball a little bit around Christmas time. Got picked up an injury as well, I believe. But no, I think if Shane Duffy didn't perhaps still have his eyes set on those Ireland caps, I think I could see him sticking around for a bit. But he wants to keep playing international football, and it's only right that the club find a way to help him do that, because he's been a fantastic servant for this club, and he'll go down in maybe not as a legend, but definitely in folklore as one of the monstrous centre backs that got us into the Premier League and helped us stay there. Another defender, Joe, that left us in this summer is the rumbling transfer saga that was Marc Cucurella. First, it was only City. He only wanted City, only Pep, only City. But it turned out, actually, that was a load of nonsense, and City were not willing to meet Tony Bloom's asking price. It eventually transpired that he would go to Chelsea for a fee rising to £62 million. Joe, not a bad bit of business for someone we bought in a year ago for about 15 million.
No, not bad at all. Amazing for him to get his dream move to Stamford Bridge, which he drove past and dreamt of playing there, even though he played there in December or January, whenever it was. So yeah, no, fair play to him. No, but that's being serious. He'd done amazing stuff for us. He was a fantastic player to watch, a breath of fresh air into our squad. One of the best left backs, defenders we've ever had at the club. I will go and say. It's a shame that it ended so sourly, I have to say. But I wish him all the best, and I hope he goes to the very top. Because he's when he's at your club, he's a fantastic person. He's a great laugh, and I'm sure the Chelsea fans love him already. I've seen a lot of good comments about him, so yeah, long may that continue for him, and maybe he might get his real dream move to Barcelona one day.
Maybe. Who knows? Who knows? Just quickly on Mark Cucurella, Dan. Paul Barber was on TalkSport the other day, and he said part of the reason that fee was so high was because when you're talking about replacing Mark Cucurella, you basically got to replace three positions because he can play left back, left wing back, and left centre back. Just really quickly, Dan, do you feel like, and we'll come on to talking about them in just a minute, but do you feel like Estupiñán and Colwill do somewhat mitigate the loss of Mark Cucurella?
Position-wise, definitely. Obviously, Estupiñán has his great lineage already. He really won the Europa League with Villarreal. Obviously, Colwill, such an amazing prospect from Chelsea. But yeah, they sort of cover the loss of him. But as well, I want to say as well, like the stuff with him going past Stamford Bridge, did his driver get lost? Because surely that's not on the main road somewhere, is it? But yeah, the transfers we brought in, as well as I think some others, obviously, yeah, that's what can I say? Paul Barber pretty much said it right. You had to bring in players that basically basically to cover the positions that he played in, and now we can't expect Estupiñán to be a left wing back and then go into centre back if he can't play it that way. So it's better to bring in somebody like Colwill on loan, which hopefully we can probably maybe get a deal at the end of this loan. But we'll see how that goes. But yeah, I think it's all good. I think it's all good now. I think we're all right.
Talking of Levi Colwill, he is a left-sided defender, and I was a bit surprised when he was brought in because we already had a left-sided centre-back on our books in Matt Clark, who had spent most of his time with us out on loan. He did eventually depart the club, Joe, for a £2.5 million. Were you a bit disappointed to see it not really work out for Matt Clark?
Disappointed for him on a personal level because I'm sure he'd want to play in the Premier League, but not disappointed from a fan's point of view, not disappointed from the club's point of view, because again he just falls victim to our incredible array of centre backs, and you've got the likes of Webster, Dunk, and Veltman starting week in week out. You're gonna have to be a really special player to pip them to that, or hope that they get an injury, or hope that they fall out of form, and that's clearly not what Matt Clark wants. He wants football. He's gone out on loan, as you said, multiple times, and now he's gone to a really historic club in Sunderland, who are going to be looking to hopefully make their way back up the league and back up into the Premier League at some point. So maybe that's a new journey for him, a new challenge, that he can be a really important part of that. And I hope for his sake that he does do well, because he's always been really professional when he's come back into pre-season, played really well, and got his loan moves. So yeah, wish him all the best.
Good skills, good skills. And the outs were coming a bit thick and fast towards the end of the window down. We also saw another striker depart, that of our top scorer for the previous 2 seasons in Neil Maupay, who joined Everton for a rumoured £15 million. Now, Everton have sort of been languishing around the bottom. Frank Lampard doesn't seem to... he hasn't seemed to have gotten the best out of them yet. Do you think this is a risky move for Neil, or was this a way for him to, similar to other players on this list of outs, get regular first-team football?
With Calvert-Lewin being injured, it was definitely a way for him to get first-team football. Because when he was linked to, I don't remember now, it was Fulham and I can't remember the other club. Forest. But obviously with Forest, obviously you're seeing how many players they brought in. You're sort of looking at it and going, can I realistically get myself into that squad with all these new players coming in? You sort of go, probably not. Then you go to Fulham and go, would I want to sit on the bench behind Mitrovic, which they ain't going to drop Mitrovic for nobody unless he was injured. And obviously, obviously when is that? It was the same sort of thing with Tottenham when they're trying to buy a striker behind Harry Kane, which you basically sat there waiting for something that might not happen. And literally, the realistic option he had was Everton, because say they had Rondon up front, which he's not great, but then let's say the option they had was to play him, and obviously now they got Maupay, which is a lot better than what they had, and that was the only choice he had really is to basically wait for Everton to come in, and obviously what they did and spent the money. And unfortunately, he didn't get that first game as well because being a bank holiday, which was the reason why he couldn't play. Which I thought was a bit funny, because if you got midweek games, surely you make sure that you can get transfers done on the Monday. But that's obviously they don't like working bank holidays.
Yeah, definitely. Joe, I will give you a chance to talk about Neal Maupay in just a little while, but I'm just mindful that we've still got quite a few more to go through. So let's talk about another striker that departed the club yesterday, and that was Andone, who had his contract mutually terminated, and he has joined another club already over in Spain's second league. The name of that club escapes me, but it was announced yesterday that he had joined them. Florian Andone will be remembered for many things. His temper, trying to kill a West Brom player and trying to break the leg of a Southampton player. But above all, Joe, he'll be remembered for that wonderful goal against that lot up the road.
Yeah, and I have it proudly displayed up there on my wall. A really cool company got in contact with me and asked me to submit one of my favorite Brighton goals, and I just had to choose that because it was against that lot up the road. And then they sent me the print, which I'm really thankful for. Unfortunately, I can't remember the company's name, so I apologize for that. But I'll give you a shout out on Twitter or something. But no, Andone, he gave us some decent memories. I remember the goal against Huddersfield as well, and he ran over to the East Stand to celebrate with them, and that was a massive goal because in that season we were fighting to stay in the league. The goal against Palace, I still remember it really well. I was sat in the southwest corner when that goal was scored, and I had such a wonderful view of it, and just seeing him take two defenders out of the game completely, and that ball nestling in the bottom corner after an unbelievable run, an unbelievable clearance, I believe, from Bernardo as well. Yeah, what a fantastic memory for him to have at this football club as well. It didn't work out. The attitude wasn't there. But what a fantastic thing to remember him for.
Most definitely. We'll remember him fondly. And it's just really quickly on Andone. Over the years, it's been no secret that the club have struggled, perhaps the right word, to bring in forward reinforcements, and the fans have always clamoured for Andone to be given a chance. That chance never materialised, whether it be because of his attitude or the fact that he was just not a player that was brought in under Potter, obviously brought in under Chrissy Houghton, different times, different place, different style. But it just never worked out for him. He didn't help himself, of course, when he went over to Turkey, made comments about Brighton, making it harder for him. But no, it's just one of those, and we move.
I really thought, sorry, Tom, just before you move, I really thought he was going to get that chance at the start of the first Graham Potter season, when he started against Watford, I believe, and it was an incredible attacking line that we had, and we won 3-0, and it was like, wow, what is this football? This is incredible. And he had a little partnership with Maupay when he came off the bench, and then I believe he fell out of favour when he broke the Southampton player and kicked Bernardo before. Or no, Bernardo kicked him, sorry, wasn't it? The little Sky Sports clip that goes around when they're doing keepy uppies with chewing gum. So yeah, that was funny. But yeah, whatever.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely a character there. So that's pretty much most of the major outs. There obviously have been other loans. We saw like Kel Sherpen go out on loan, Teddy Jenks. Zach Emerson also left the club on a permanent move to Blackpool. But the reason we haven't, I suppose, talking about those players in depth is because they're not regular first teamers. And I'm sure there's some other loans in amongst those as well. So let's talk. Well, actually, there's one last thing I wanted to just chat about, and that was Steven Alzate. He was supposed to join West Brom on loan, but it fell through. I would have been quite disappointed to have seen Steven Alzate go out on the club. I think after last year's performance against Chelsea, which I bang on about all the time, he was so good, and I just think he's too good for the Championship, if I'm honest. But that
regular
that
football though.
Yeah,
Regular football, like, and he wants Columbia caps as well. It's a similar situation to Shane Duffy, really. He's not going to get in now ahead of Gilmour, ahead of Alexis McAllister, Caicedo, Lallana when he's fit, Pascal Gross. Need I go on? So I think it would have been really good for him. If I'm talking from his perspective, really good for him to go out and get some really regular football in the Championship as well, which is an amazingly difficult league. And I think he'd find out a lot about himself.
Too true. Let's hope that something can materialise in January. But in the meantime, let's hope that he continues to play in the Cup run if we manage to get past Arsenal, and finds himself perhaps on the bench if and when required. So let's talk a few of the ins. Now, there were only 5 major ins, I suppose. And even then, that's a bit of a stretch. Let's talk about first Julio Enciso, who was bought for about £10 million from Libertad Asunción. Apologies for the butchering of that pronunciation there, guys. But yeah, bought him for £10 million. Looked pretty sharp in pre-season. Looked good against Forest Green Rovers. Very direct. Has made the bench once so far this season. But an awful lot of pressure is going to be put on this young man's shoulders. When, and I'm going to say when, because it's not if, it's when Danny Welbeck gets injured. But based solely on what we've seen of him so far in pre-season, what do you make of him so far, Dan?
He's done fairly well. As I say, during pre-season, we're hearing that he was going to go to the Championship, because I think there was a little thing that came out that he was going to be known up to Championship, which when we first saw him, we go, why are we doing that? Because he looks very good. I know he's a young man, obviously, he's only 17, 18. He's come to a new country, completely different league to what he was used to. Could sort of understand to that point, but he looked so good in those first few games in the pre-season. And then to say then also Graham Potter's base was like, yeah, we got to keep him because he's something different, which I'm glad we are, because to say we always need someone different to come in. But yeah, I want to see him a bit more, really, because it'd be nice to see him off the bench today. Somebody who have no fear, just come on and just do something and do something different. And obviously, like we got like Matoma obviously come in, obviously back from his loan, and pretty much doing the same sort of like something different that haven't got already. But yeah, I'd like to see a bit more of him. If it's in the league, if he does get a start in the league, obviously definitely in the cup runs. I'd love to see him play against Arsenal, because that would be probably the dream for him, to just play against one of the bigger clubs and do well. And obviously, then hopefully, then he might be able to break himself into the first team.
Yeah, let's hope so. He has looked exciting. Obviously, there are other players that play similar position to him. Matoma, who you mentioned there, Sarmiento as well, are wingers, which I believe in Ciso is more of a winger than an out-and-out striker, as it were. So a lot of competition for those places there. And we haven't even mentioned Trossard or March in that conversation either. So it'll be interesting to see how many minutes he does accrue up until January. And then I'm sure the club will reassess what is the best pathway for his development. Another winger that we brought in, Joe, really briefly, just mentioning Simon Adingra, who came from FC Nordsjælland for about £6 million, gone out on loan to Royal Union St. Gilloise. He seems to have settled in quite well there. I believe he's made a few starts, and he's scored a goal or two, I believe. So I suppose that's one to keep an eye on for the future.
Yeah, definitely. And again, it is a player that we sort of miss at the Albion, someone that's quick and direct. The guy is rapid, and he played against us in pre-season for USG. And we were there was a lot of fans saying, "Oh, why is he on that team? Why is he not with us?" But with the amount of players that we do have in the wide positions, and maybe he wouldn't have got his chance. So I think it's really valuable that he goes out on loan and to a league that will definitely help him, because I do believe it is a step up from what he was playing before. Even if it is the Belgian league. Obviously, we've seen quite a few players come from the Belgian league and have done really well in the Premier League. So let's hope that's the case with him, and see what he can do next season.
Very much so. So let's move on to Levi Colwill, who came to Brighton on loan from Chelsea as part of that Cucurella deal, or as a subsequent, if you want Cucurella, you need to give us a defender in return. So we have instant cover. Dan, it caused a few people to raise their eyebrows when this was announced as a loan move, considering Brighton and Hove Albion have notoriously shied away from loan moves in previous seasons, declaring that they don't want to develop other teams' players. I've gone out and said that in the next game that I would drop Adam Webster in favour of Levi Colwill. He's made a few substitute appearances. Do you think he can kick on this season and be someone that we can look to perhaps bring in on a permanent basis next year?
I can't see why. It was a real sought after player, because I think there was other teams, I think in the Premier League as well, were interested in him. Obviously, then we obviously had to head to start because they wanted Cucurella. But I think I agree with that. I think it'd be nice to see someone different, to see if he can play from the start, to see how he integrates with Dunk and with Veltman. Just do something different for the next game, because obviously what we tried in the Fulham game, obviously you guys both spoke about, it just didn't work, and it'd be nice to have something, just little changes here and there, and just try something different, and maybe more the same what we were doing. But I think next season we definitely should be looking at, obviously, depending on how he does overall in the season, would be probably good to see if he's good enough to stay, and if so, let's see if we can get a decent deal out of it, and then. And obviously, as you say, with the loan stuff as well. Obviously, there were some other loans that were rumoured. Obviously, I won't go into the rumoured ones. But yeah, it's like we don't want. I think before we used to have like players that were coming back from injuries, and then they'll be loaned to us, and we're playing them obviously to be fitter. And it's like, why are we doing this? Why? And obviously then the rules changed. They've done the loaning anyway. Then obviously we were like, no, we're not doing that, which I'm happy with. But if this will come out with a permanent in the next summer, then I'd be happy with the loan. But if not, I'm feeling like, what's the point in that whole loan?
Yeah, and we said very similar, didn't we, Joe? Just really briefly, we said about, it's a bit of a frustrating one that there seems to be no option to buy. Because as the club have said in previous years, we don't really want to be developing other club's talent. And you can almost guarantee that Chelsea would have stipulated something about playing time in any sort of loan agreement, which then, it gets in the way of someone like, Van Heck's development. Just really quickly, Joe, what have you made of, or what do you make, of the Colwill loan?
I think he can be a really important player for us this season. And I think it's, as Dan said, really important that we got some cover in instantly after Cucurella left. Or I think it was you that said that, Tom. So I think it's very important that we do have a player like him come in for instant cover. And then we'll just see what happens with future negotiations. I believe that we've done a lot of negotiating with Chelsea over the last few seasons, obviously with Tarek Lamptey way back in 2020 as well. So I believe we've got a decent relationship with Chelsea. And let's hope that if he does have a successful season with us and there's no option for him to be starting next season for Chelsea, that we can make that move permanent and for a decent fee as well, because we're taking a player off their hands. We're taking some wages off their hands. Chelsea are obviously going in a different direction defensively. I believe they were looking at Joseph Gvardiol from RB Leipzig or Salzburg, one of them. I think it's Leipzig. So I don't see why Chelsea would sort of hold him back and say, no, we're not going to let you go permanently. I understand he's got a decent enough ceiling, and I understand he's got some good potential, but I guess it's really difficult to get into the mentality of what Chelsea are thinking with him. Would you rather see him go on and be decent? Like, even if they sold him to us with a buyback clause, I wouldn't be totally against that. I know there's not one included with Gilmour, but Chelsea do that a lot with their talent. So whether that materializes, I would like to see him sign on a permanent, because what we have seen of Cole Will, I really like, and he can be a really good player for us.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, Chelsea are renowned for hoarding players, a lot of talent they keep hold of. And I think after the Tarek Lamptey deal, especially initially after that first year when the likes of Bayern Munich were reportedly interested in him, I think that probably put the fear of God into Chelsea, thinking, "Oh my goodness, what have we done?" And I believe that's why is it Livramento that plays for Southampton? We were apparently interested in him as well, but there was a buyback clause and we passed up on it because of that. And I have to believe that the reason that they insisted on a buyback clause was because of how well Tarek Lamptey had done for us. We talked a little bit there about how we needed to replace Marc Cucurella. Colwill does one of those positions in the left centre-back role. And the other one that we brought in to, I suppose, replace or step into that hole left by Marc Cucurella was Pervis Estupiñán, who came from Villarreal for about £15 million, can play as a left wing-back or as a left-back. Dan, I believe that his debut against Leeds was okay. It was pretty good, pretty solid. A few wayward passes here or there. But then he followed that up with a pretty poor performance against Fulham. So I think it's going to take him a while to adjust to the Premier League. Do you think that's fair to say?
I think it's very fair. I think the last podcast, I think somebody brought up about Cucurella's debut was a bit like that, and to be honest with you, I think with the Fulham game, I think everybody was a bit off that day anyway, so it wasn't really very noticeable that he struggled a bit. But obviously, it's his first away game in the Premier League. It's probably very different, especially Fulham anyway. Their ground is not very loud. Don't have to be, but obviously, he's got to have time to adjust. Not everybody's going to go adjust straight away to the league. It's different to La Liga if it's only a little bit or whatever. But yeah, there is a player there that because people keep saying, I think I've seen people say that they consider him to be better than Cucurella, which is, I think, a bit early to say yet. I think. But obviously, he has got to pay a grade for this to say he came in after winning he has won the Europa League, which we can only dream of doing ourselves at the moment. But yeah, it's good to have him in. At least it's somebody. We replaced him with somebody. Cucurella with somebody. So and Estupiñán does look very good. So we can't be that upset with who we got, and hopefully he becomes better and plays very well for us, and hopefully leads us to the same place he did with Villarreal.
And that would be spectacular. And I think, Joe, you mentioned in a previous podcast about remembering that Cucurella's first game at the club wasn't particularly covered in glory. But we move. One last player, Joe, that came in last night was Billy Gilmour, signed for about £9 million. Now, this, Joe, is, I think it's quite an exciting signing. I think it's worth remembering that, 2 years ago, he was one of the most exciting midfielders in the country, because, especially after that Scotland-England game where he bossed a midfield containing Declan Rice and Calvin Phillips. So, Joe, I mean, if nothing more, it's a superb value for money, Billy Gilmour, for about £9 million. How do you feel he can slot into this Graham Potter side?
Well, Tom, I know you like a fact, so here are 3 for you that I prepared because obviously I knew we were talking about Billy Gilmour today. So He was man of the match in his Premier League debut. He was man of the match in his Champions League debut. He was also man of the match in his FA Cup debut. So we have got a serious player on our hands, and fans should be unbelievably excited about this incredible young man playing with one of the best managers, maybe even in the world. And I know I'm a bit biased with Graham Potter, but he is one of the greatest managers to be developing a player. We've spoken about his emotional intelligence. We've spoken about how he gets players playing in different positions, how just unbelievably intelligent he is, especially with youngsters. So really excited to see Billy Gilmour through the door at Lancing. Let's hope that we can see a little glimpse of him on Sunday against Leicester. This is a guy that was dubbed as the next Lampard, the next this, the next that. Sometimes those tags on players bring them down a little bit, and it doesn't materialise to be that. But this is a guy that played in a really poor Norwich side last season that got relegated. A young man of Billy Gilmour and is not going to keep them up single-handedly. So let's see what he can do in a really prospering, exciting side managed by Graham Potter.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up the Norwich bit, Joe, because some fans will inevitably say, oh, yeah, but he played for a team that got relegated. And yes, that is true, but it's worth remembering that Norwich play a completely different style of football to Potter and, Brighton. And also with the additional quality around him at Brighton, it will only bring out the best in him. So there you have it, guys. There are the breakdowns of the outs and the ins. I'll go through those really quickly for you. So out, we had Bissouma, Connolly, Østegård, Duffy, Cucurella, Clark, Maupay, and Andoni. That's who we've chatted about today. And ins, we had Enciso, Adingra, Colwill, Estupinian, and Gilmour. Now, guys, I'm going to come to you each in turn. I'm going to ask you a really simple question. If you had to give our transfer window a rating out of 10, with 10 being excellent and 0 being dreadful, how would you rate it? Joe, I'll come to you first.
7 out of 10. I think not signing a striker gives me reason to deduct 3 from our transfer window. I feel it would be really harsh on the players that we have brought in to rate it any lower. Because I feel like we've got some really good, exciting prospects come through, and also players that can come in and make an instant impact if we give them time. So yeah, I'll give it a 7.
Dan, what rating would you give our transfer window out of 10?
I think about the same, 7. I think I totally agree with Joe. The striker thing, we really, I'm a bit less about what everyone else is saying. I think Welbeck, I think he is an injury away, basically, with basically being forced to basically playing unproven people. But obviously, I think Graham needs to start putting these players in the same with like Undav. I don't know why we didn't swap Welbeck with Undav and against Fulham, but instead to try and go for a system where historically we did okay a few times in, and obviously we did have that nice draw against Liverpool by using a false 9. And the same with the prospects as well. Obviously, Estupinian and Cicio, and obviously in Gilmour, all looking like they're going to be great players. Not for right now, but for later, for the future seasons. Especially working underneath Graham Potter, they're doing very well. But yeah, I think we did okay in that transfer window, and yeah, hopefully we should have a nice season.
What about you then, Tom? What would you rate this transfer window at?
If you'd asked me before Fulham, and everything had transpired as it has, I would have probably gone for a 7. But I think after Fulham, I would go for a 5. The reason for that is because I don't think it's dreadful. I'm not in the camp of, oh my goodness, it's the end of the world. But I'm not also in the camp of, it's fine, everything's great, everything's going to be amazing. I'm sort of very much in the middle because, and I'll lay it out for you. So we've sold our top scorer of the last 2 seasons and have not replaced him. Last season, only 4 teams scored fewer goals than us. I think for the last 2 seasons, it's been really clear where we need to strengthen, and we haven't done so. And it's like I said in our Fulham analysis, it's not just goals. It's the striker, the focal point of our team. And it was so evident against Fulham that we just didn't have one. And I genuinely think that's why we lost the game, because we didn't have a player that could hold the ball up, bring other people into play, which is why whenever we went past the halfway line, our play inevitably just broke down. And Danny Welbeck does that job exceptionally well. So if Danny Welbeck didn't have such an illustrious history of injury, then I probably wouldn't be feeling as potentially apprehensive as I am, because there is so much more to Danny Welbeck's game than goals, as there very much was to Neil Maupay's. But if Danny Welbeck can't start 2 games in such quick succession, which is fine, as you say, Dan, the fact that we didn't start Undav then makes me think, is he up to it? And if the answer to that is no, then I feel very apprehensive that we're going into a season weaker than we were when we started the transfer window. Now, I know that it's not a black and white argument, because Joe, you rightfully pointed out that there was a lot of not bad blood, but there was Neil Maupay clearly wasn't happy towards the end of last season. That was really, really obvious. And there is no, keeping him around at a club where he's not happy would probably not generate results or performances. So, fair, it's a very, very fair comment. But I am apprehensive that we've got a very injury-prone Welbeck, a very unproven at anywhere near this level Undav, and Evan Ferguson, who's 17, who looks like a really good prospect. But as we've already chatted about in this very episode in regards to Aaron Connolly, you just don't know what could happen if Evan Ferguson hit the ground running, scored that brace on his debut. I'd like to think he's more level-headed than his compatriot Aaron Connolly, but we just don't know. So my question to you then, Joe, is do you think that this squad is weaker or stronger than it was at the end of last season?
Just before I answer your question, let's have a little chat here. So you say stick Evan Ferguson and see what he can do. See if he's Premier League level.
I don't want that. But that's my point. We've got injury-prone Welbeck, unproven Undav, and a very young 17-year-old.
But do we know that? Do we know that Undav can't do it? Has he had enough time?
Well, no. But then what? My question is, why? My question would be, well, why didn't he start against Fulham? And then you could say, oh, fair enough, Graham Potter was trying something tactically, but when it was clear it wasn't working, why didn't he change it?
Again, like I mentioned in the Fulham podcast, he's a manager that trusts his team and will give his team more time than maybe the fans would give, and he's a little bit more patient than us fans are, because if we're losing, we want our team to be changed. We want somebody else to show whether they can do it. And my argument is that we can't really judge Undav for not being up to it. I think the Fulham performance is solely on Graham Potter, in my opinion. It's on him. He got it wrong, and he knows that. He admitted to that. So I don't see why we should be saying it's not time for Undav. It's not. He's not ready. He's not this. He's not that. Because we just haven't seen it until he starts the game for us and plays a good 70 minutes. I will make my judgment then.
That's really fair, Joe. It is worth remembering he did play against Forest Green Rovers, a League One side, a side that is not particularly prolific at League One level, and he looked quite ordinary. Now, that's a game in isolation, it's worth saying, but Potter lamented Danny Welbeck's an inability, shall we say, to start 2 games in such quick succession. So again, it all just sort of makes me think, well, maybe does Graham trust Undav? And if he doesn't trust him yet, I totally agree with you, Joe, because that trust comes from experience. It comes from playing games at this level but I don't know. There's a lot of question marks around the depth that we've got. There's a lot of question marks around the strength that we've got. And for a team that doesn't score many goals going into their season with what we have, in the context of what we have, it worries a lot of fans. And as I say, I'm not in the Potter out brigade. I'm not in the the club have bottled it brigade. I'm not. I'm from my personal perspective, as level-headed as I try to be about many things involving life and football, I reserve judgment to rate it any lower or any higher until we see more football. But there was one point Andy Naylor made in regards to the January transfer window, because a similar thing happened. We were saying we need another striker. We need another striker. One didn't come in, and Andy Naylor's response was, "Yeah, but then we finished 9th." But my response to Andy Naylor was, "Yeah, but where could we have finished if we had brought in a striker?" Because let's not forget, guys, last season there were hours where we hadn't scored a goal. We didn't score a goal for 6 games. And that was after Christmas. And then before Christmas, we hadn't scored a goal for about 3 or 4 games, because I remember doing the maths for it. So it's really clear where we struggle as a team. And Graham Potter rightfully points out, you don't need to score 1 and then hold the rest at bay. And there's definitely an argument to be had about goals coming in from elsewhere. And I totally get that, which is why I've rated it a 5, not a 2. But it's one of those where I genuinely I think that we are notoriously poor at bringing in left backs, and we're notoriously poor at bringing in strikers. And I was not surprised, but disappointed not to see reinforcements.
All of the concerns that you raise with the depth, all of the concerns that you raise with not bringing in a striker, I 100% get it. I have the same concerns, maybe a bit quieter, because I've found myself in the last couple of years just not overly bothered. And this is just my opinion. I 100% respect yours. But I'm of the opinion of, okay, it didn't happen. What can we do about it? We can't do anything about it. Everyone else is well within their rights to have their concerns. And again, I have mine. But then when the transfer window slams shut, all we can do is hope and trust and get behind the players that are at the club and are going to wear the shirt for us. And I think the is Undav ready argument should be kept a little bit away from the we don't have enough depth, because I feel that's really unfair on a man that's scored a lot of goals, albeit in the Belgian league, and has come to a new club where we've given trust in him to replace our 9 goals a season striker. So although it could work out really horrifically and I could look like an absolute knob for saying this, I just really hope that we give him the time and the support that he deserves going forward. And I'm not saying that you guys aren't at all, but I just really hope that the greater fan base of Brighton & Hove Albion, which we all know is at times, I just hope that we can give him the chance that he deserves.
Look at that. Me and Joe disagreed, but we did it in a polite way. How lovely.
Big dub ratio. What?
I'm in my 30s, mate. I don't know what any of that means. Just before I ask you, Dan, what your thoughts on the striker situation are, I'm just going to bring in one thing that does irk me. And it's more of the fan reaction. Because a lot of people have raised concerns, legitimate concerns, and some people have raised those in a sensible way, as I hope that I have done. And some fans have raised those in a not so sensible way. One of the rebuttals that you often hear from perhaps people on the other side of the argument is, well, who would you bring in? Who could we bring in for the, who fits into our club ethos surrounding price point and sell on value and blah, 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 blah. And that really annoys me, because it's not my job. I'm not a football scout. I shouldn't have to have a prerequisite of a list of 10 players that we could bring in before I go, oh, it's a bit risky to start the season with 3 strikers one of which is injury prone and blah, 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 blah. I think that's a really lazy way of trying to deflect valid concerns. I think that, as we've said on previous podcasts, and I've already said today, I think if you're concerned, that's great. That's fine. There's no issue with being concerned. There's no issue with being not unconcerned. It's just about making sure that you approach things in a sensible way. But I don't think it helps the conversation at all to turn around and be like, well, actually, you need to give me 10 players before you complain that we could have brought in. Because I just think that's just, it doesn't further the conversation. It just aims to shut it down. And I'm not about that life. Dan, I've spoken enough. How do you feel about the striker situation? Are you in Team Joe, where you're happy with how we're going? Or are you in Team Tom, who is a bit concerned in regard? Well, I say concerned is a strong word. Let's say apprehensive.
I think with the striker situation, I say we're obviously saying what ifs, and obviously we're saying what if Danny Welbeck is injured. Obviously, I've heard people saying inevitably, and you could say obviously his record. You could say it could be inevitable that he get injured. But the thing is, though, we saw him pre-season looking very, very fit, looking the best shape of his life, and you're sort of hoping, looking at it going. You could say he maybe the injury problems maybe behind him, but it's always going to be in the back of your mind, which is thinking that what if he does get injured and he has a pretty serious one, and then he's out for weeks/months, and then you're asking for the next person underneath, which looks like it'd be Undav, to be the next focal point. Which then, if he hasn't given enough time to gel with the squad, enough time to big minutes in the Premier League or in any league, whatever, to play with the team in a competitive way, it can become worrying in that way. I think that's where I sort of sit in the middle, sort of like I'm a bit concerned, but then you got to look at who you've got and sort of. You got to hope that the players that we have got can do the job, because they say like to buy the 15-20 goal striker is going to cost money. Going to cost a lot of money. But then as well, if you're buying it from a different league, say Championships, obviously people want Brereton Diaz. Obviously, then if you go abroad to anywhere else, that's still the same amount of risk, I think, involved. To then trying to use Undav, who we've already got on our books, to take over. It's all about looking at risks and stuff. But would you spend 30, 40, even more? Because I think with Joe Linton, I always use Joe Linton as an example, because obviously he was brought in as a striker and he was absolutely awful. Now he's flourishing in a midfield role, which obviously that's not what he was brought in for, but. Now he's obviously got a new role, and obviously he doesn't do that job anymore. But that's the sort of thing, isn't it? It's sort of like you have to look at the risks, and would you rather take a risk on a player that you've already got on the books to sort of go, right, you try and see what happens, than going out and spending 50 million on a player that turns out can't play at this level, can't score goals. And then you're stuck with this player that you can't get rid of. Because as you say for that Joe Linton, they say to get rid of him, just get anything you can for him, get rid of him, because he's not a good striker. But now he's doing well in a different role, which obviously is good for them. But yeah, I think we should wait it out. I think, if say you got 13 games, which is the least amount between windows. So obviously, I think we're lucky we got a World Cup in between both windows. So literally. So if it doesn't work, I'm fairly certain they'll probably be like, right, we got to be looking at the World Cup, looking at players who are in the World Cup, see if any players are available in January, and then try something, at least anything. Because in January there's going to be strikers that probably are not playing for their squads, and go, right, we can see if we get cheap there. This guy maybe on loan. I'm sure they've got a backup plan in case something doesn't go completely as planned. Because if Undav isn't able to do it, then obviously they'll go to find someone else. But yeah, I'll give someone else a chance to talk now.
Talking of players in different roles, once before Brighton and Hove Albion had a centre-back called Adam Virgo, and they played him up front. Now, Lewis Dunk, he's a centre-back, and he scored a delightful goal, albeit in the wrong goal, against Sanchez, completely wrong-footed him. Maybe, I've said we've got an amazing array of centre-backs, somebody could fill Lewis Dunk's role at the back, and then we could play Lewis Dunk up front and see what happens. People are going to think I'm crazy, but I'm all for it.
I was going to suggest Jason Steele. So no, you
Gully.
I don't recognise the new Gully. Dan, you raised a very important point there in that price does not always guarantee results. I think you rightfully point out Joel Linton. Was it Wesley at Villa as well? I think it cost about £40 million and did absolutely nothing. And in regards to 20 goal a season striker, I think only Salah and Kane scored more than 20 last season. So, I think the argument that has to be that goals need to come from elsewhere on the pitch. But for me, especially after Fulham, the biggest concern is the hole that Danny Welbeck leaves in terms of his hold-up play. And that's my main source of concern. But let us know in the comments below where you fall on the situation. Do you feel like, once again, Brighton have not done enough to bring in a striker? Although it is worth remembering that apparently yesterday we were trying to bring in a striker, but it didn't happen. I think we wanted a loan. Barrow, I think his name was. We wanted a loan, but the club weren't interested. That we were in, was it Fiorentina? Perhaps I can't remember exactly, but anyway, we were interested in a player, but it didn't materialize. But let us know in the comments below. Do you think that it's all going to be fine and dandy and Welbeck is going to survive, or do you think it's only a matter of time before we find ourselves light in the striking options, and that those fans like me get to say, "I told you so"? Team Joe or Team Tom? Let us know down below. Also, let us know down below if there were any other players that you would have liked to have seen brought in or sent out. Let us know, because, that's the sort of stuff we like. We like to have a conversation, don't we, guys? It's what we do.
No, I disagree. Meh.
That was not as mature as our previous disagreement, Joe. As ever, guys, in the comments below, keep it clean and think before you type. That's like my new favorite thing. Think before you type. So thank you very much for joining us on our transfer special. As I say, leave comments in the section down below and let us know what you think, because that's what we want. We want to know what you think. Yeah, that's right. You, the person I'm looking at right now, because your opinion matters, and we appreciate you for watching our lovely content. We do have some more content coming your way. We've got Curtis's FIFA content that is going to be coming to you very soon. We've also got, as I mentioned on a previous podcast, an interview with an author who has written a book about two very special Brighton players from back in the 1950s. More information as and when that will be coming out to you. But in the meantime, guys, keep it cool, keep it breezy, because that's how we at Albion Obsessed like to keep things. And wherever you are, whenever you are, have a wonderful day, evening, morning, afternoon, brunch. We'll see you next time. Peace.